Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Gene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs.
Welcome to the Frontline Innovators podcast. I'm your host, Gene Signorini, and I'm excited for today's episode. Our guest today is an enterprise architect in her heart of hearts, but also has a broad and deep focus across all domains of IT. She currently focuses on helping companies in the energies and utilities sector, as well as manufacturing, serving as the CTO of Energy and Utilities at IBM. Please welcome Jennifer McComas to the show. Jen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Gene. It's great to be here.
Thanks
so much.
So we like to start the show kind of with a bigger question. And as we've mentioned, this is all about the frontline workforce, or deskless workforce, as we say. So the question I'd like to ask you first is, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the deskless workforce today?
So, Gene, I think this is certainly not a problem that is new with the pandemic, but one that was exacerbated by the pandemic. And certainly, I think the pace of technology is the biggest challenge for our deskless workforce. So if you can imagine, we've talked a lot about the heroic efforts of our frontline workers that did not have the benefits of being able to work remotely, having the tools or the automated processes to be able to work in a disconnected fashion. These folks have been on the front lines, and we very helpfully have decided that we should be changing up business process, changing up ways of working, making sure that we can provide sustainable work environments, not only for our frontline workers, but also for our knowledge workers. For some of us, that is a natural adaptation, and it's something that we embrace easily because we have either made a career out of identifying and adopting new technologies or working with them to solve business problems. That's not true for everybody. So if you can imagine someone that is, more used to a frontline position that is not heavily automated, primarily manual, we have this great idea that we're going to introduce technology. This is essentially another thing for these folks to do rather than something that's helpful. And I find us doing that across different industries and technologies. Oftentimes we think technology is the solution, and we go looking for a problem to solve with it rather than identifying what the overarching challenges, or I don't like to use the word problems. I like to think in terms of challenges and opportunities. Sometimes we take technology and we go looking for opportunities and challenges to face rather than really spending time with and reflecting on what the business objectives are of an organization, regardless of industry, and working our way down to what's the right technology, if at all, to address that issue.
Well, I think that's a great point, because it may not be a technology problem per se. It could be something else. I think we often think that technology is the answer to everything. I think that's some great insights. I'd really like to come back to that in a moment, but I think it would be worthwhile for our audience first just to talk a little bit about your role at IBM, what you do, what you're responsible for, what kind of companies you're working with today.
Sure. So as you mentioned, and thank you for that very generous introduction, I am an enterprise architect for the IBM organization. I work broadly across the portfolio of products and services that IBM has to offer. And I work with clients. I get to know their organizations as a trusted advisor, essentially, understanding what their business objectives are, where they are relative to their maturity curve in adopting technology. How does it fit and make sense for their business? And to the best of my ability, I look for opportunities to map what we have to offer as an IBM organization to meet those challenges. So as you can see, I'm living this. What I said is the biggest challenge. My mission is really for my clients. And as I said, I focus primarily on energy and utilities, but also have a manufacturing background. Um, I have started to work with a broad set of clients to understand specifically today, what are the business challenges that either have cropped up in the last 18 months relative to managing change around COVID, or simply just becoming more emergent and innovative in their marketplace. What are the goals? Where are their strategic focus? What do they want to do as an organization and bringing their culture along and their people in adopting technology, and then helping them to find the right entry point, the right um, the right places to get started if technology is right for them, or even at a higher level, understanding how would their business processes, the value chains, what they use to run their business, how would those things need to be adapted or optimized to be in a better position to adopt technology. So obviously, as an IBM corporation, you probably know that we are a hybrid cloud and AI leader in the marketplace. That's been true for a while, and that is where we feel we bring value to the world in the work that we've done around artificial intelligence, and certainly as being the backbone to the new emergent hybrid cloud environment that is emerging across markets. So we look for opportunities to help organizations understand their business processes better. Sometimes when you ask somebody, well, why do you do that? And they say, well, we've just always done it that way.
Hmm.
I love to hear that. Then let's unpack that. Let's talk about why you've always done it that way. Well, what are you really doing? Let's start with an as is, right? The enterprise architect in me sings when I have an opportunity to unpack with somebody, what do they do as part of their job and why? That's a great journey of rediscovery in my mind, because as they really start to think, maybe it is a process that they've adopted. They were hired 5 years ago, and Tom trained me and he told me to do it this way, and okay, good. Why do you do that? What are some of the challenges? And then you start to unweave and unpack, why are you following this process this way? What are some things that could make it better, right? Sometimes that's the first time anybody's asked them that. Oh, well, you know what would be really great if I could go here and click that way and have this do this for me. There emerges your use case. Well, let's see how we can do that, right? Let's see. And it's almost like Christmas. You're delivering a present, hopefully more than one under the tree, that makes somebody's life better by making the everyday things that they do easier, that either it gives them time to do higher level things or do their job in a whole different way that delivers value back to the business. That's really the secret sauce for me, when I can dive into those process elements, and then there's actually a technology solution that we can introduce to solve that problem and then grow from there.
It's really interesting because when you talk about, in your heart of hearts being an architect, an enterprise architect, you don't necessarily associate IT and IT architecture with, the front lines of the business and operations in a lot of ways. And I think many companies maybe have difficulty doing it. So how do you connect those dots? How do you help companies connect those dots between, even you talked about things like, cloud and AI, and it'd be interesting to understand how that goes downstream to operations and ultimately to the front lines of the workforce.
So the key is, I think when cloud and AI became the the shiny new toy, as I had said before, I think all of us, many organizations, went looking for problems to solve with it.
Yep.
This is the answer. What is the problem? And you really can't do that. So, from a frontline perspective, and I'll share a story with you,
Great.
it was ingrained in me as I was coming up through the ranks of IT, developing capabilities across systems administration, um, application design, and eventually enterprise architecture. It was never about the technology. Technology for the sake of technology is cool and it's lots of fun, but it doesn't survive. right? So it was always ingrained in me that you go out, I was working for a manufacturing company at the time. You go out, you walk the floors, you talk to people, you learn about what they're doing. And these are folks that, granted it was a combination of, computer integrated manufacturing line, that some of the operations were automated, but the rest of it was working with supervisors and folks with soldering irons in their hands. And how are you doing your job? And what are the challenges, and what can we do to make that better? That's not a technology conversation. That's a business conversation. And in order to, as I had said, do technology with people, not to
Yes.
people, in a way that makes their lives better, you don't start with technology. You get out of the data center, you go out and talk to people, you understand what value they bring to the organization and the work that they do, and then you use your own expertise to start talking with them about not only what are you doing, what are some of the things that we could do to make it better, and then what's your tolerance for adopting a technology solution to help you do that job. Because here's the thing, again, we do technology to folks. We don't necessarily go out, have conversations, figure out what the culture and the readiness is of the organization to adopt technology. We just say, I can give you this automated process and that's going to make your life easier. Well, how do you know that the reaction on the other end is it going to be, why am I going to do that? Is it really going to make things faster? Wait a minute. Are you going to have an automated process do my job for me? Whoa, I don't like that. We're not being respectful of meeting people where they are relative to the culture of the organization, their understanding of the technology, and what we would need to do to adopt it. That's where enterprise architecture versus IT comes in, because an enterprise architect will take into account the system holistically, not only the technology at the heart of what powers the process, but then the how do you support it on the back end, and how do you promote it on the top end, right? How do you weave that into the overall system? What are the integration points, both technology and process focused integration points, that will make the system that you're proposing successful? that is really that is really why taking an enterprise architecture approach as opposed to an IT approach, even when you're going out to talk with folks on the front line, folks that don't sit at a desk, folks that do not use technology on a day-to-day basis. That's why that point of view is really important.
Yeah, I think that's great. And there's a few things I'd love to kind of follow up on this. One of which is the how you make that successful. And I think we'll get to that, right? How do we kind of make that successful for the front line? I want to pull it back for a second, just to go back to that initial challenge you talked about, because I think there's a few things in there that I'd love to dig in on. You mentioned the acceleration of technology and how the pandemic kind of exacerbated that quite a bit. And you did make that distinction between your knowledge worker and your frontline worker. And I think you and I are knowledge workers, right? And I think, everybody kind of recognizes how much things change for knowledge workers, right? Because they weren't going into the office. They were, doing their Zooms from home and all that great stuff. But how much did change for the frontline worker? Did that accelerate as well? Did things change for the frontline? And if it hasn't yet, what do you think those things, what do you think, the pandemic may have done for the frontline going forward?
So here's an interesting, and I'll find the link for you. I was watching a business briefing on Sunday morning, and we're talking a lot about return to work right now, right? And what are the perspectives and challenges and things to consider as we consider return to work. We're finding that about a third of um, maybe a third to two-thirds of knowledge workers, are thinking, yeah, I could go into the office a couple of times a week. That would be fine. I could, but the rest would be from home.
Yeah.
There is a resultant resentment growing on the other side. One of the challenges, 25% of folks, when asked what was the biggest challenge with the return to work as we start to emerge back into the workforce, 25% of workers were resentful of their coworkers who wanted to or could work remotely, because it's about that percentage that really can't. So there are a population of people that really can't wait to get back in the office, and maybe they'll work at home every once in a while. There's a population of people that can't. And I think we need to address that. Can't, in the sense that the processes, the functions, and the value they bring to the organization are designed to be done in a manual way today. Doesn't mean that they can't be transformed to work in a more automated way, to work in a more flexible way. You know, as I said, we sent folks into hospitals, we sent folks back into, manufacturing plants. You know, in my industry, we send, utility workers up poles to fix, critical parts in raging storms all the time. And we laud them as heroes, but we have high expectations on them. And there is, you could see where, there could be a little bit of a resentment for those of us that are knowledge workers, that get to have the flexibility to decide, well, maybe I don't really want to go into the office today. I can work from here. um, I think there's a gap there, not only from a organizational cultural perspective, but also from a wage perspective, that we could say there is an opportunity for us to really examine how we support frontline workers, how we support deskless workers in a way that gives them the flexibility and the choice to determine how they are going to provide value to their organization. There will always be some percentage of things that it's best to have a human presence and to do in a manual way, for safety reasons, for, societal perceptional reasons. Um, but then there are ways that we could weave technology into the ways that we work to make things better. Here's a great example. I've been
Yeah.
doing a lot of work with robotics in the utility space, and it's really a great use case when we talk about, the risk that we put our line workers in if we're going to send them up a pole, or we're going to send them into a high voltage substation to do inspections. Everything from, as they go around and they do the inspections, they could be encountering noxious gases that could make them sick. They could be walking into high voltage areas that are very unsafe for them,
Hmm.
right down to they could be going to examine a dial, open up a box, and find a wasp's nest,
Yep.
and things come out. That's a great example where, whether it be drone technology, robot technology, with the right sort of, inspection payloads and cameras and sensors, you could be automating some of that process in a way that not only makes your workers safe, but also gives them the opportunity to increase the number of inspections that they're doing, so that you can start to do some trend analysis on asset performance that helps you examine, when something's going to fail, so you can do more proactive maintenance as opposed to run to fail, right? That's an example where we could definitely um, make lives, make things better for the lives of our line workers, in a way that they're ready to embrace. On the polar opposite of that, that same robot technology, I don't know if you saw in the news, the city of New York had invested in some four-legged robots
Yes.
to go out on patrols with police officers. This was, now you could see where some of the similar benefits, right? Augmenting law enforcement, augmenting community patrols, augmenting some of the work that officers do if, you're needing to do sort of an investigation into a tough area. Maybe you want to, send the robot out first. This was not accepted well by the community where they were deploying this particular technology. It looked very impersonal. It looked very threatening. It was just invoking a lot of feelings and perceptions, in the use of, not only robots but robot dogs
Yeah.
going
It's
into
like
areas
either
to
like
help with law
we're in
enforcement.
a Terminator world, or,
Exactly. Very
RoboCop.
impersonal.
Yes.
Yes, very scary. That was where, maybe somebody didn't do their homework in terms of adoption. and the cultural aspects of introducing automation and technology into an environment. So, as you can see, just to kind of wrap up that point, there are a lot of different use cases and opportunities to make things better for frontline workers, but there has to be a consideration for the environment in which we are promoting these things, and really looking at the adoption of the technology, the readiness, the level of maturity to introduce that technology into that space.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the automation and how that impacts the frontline workforce. It's interesting. We talk about knowledge workers and frontline workers, and I think we do a disservice because it seems what we're saying is that frontline workers are not knowledge workers, right? And there is knowledge work that happens on the front lines. Um, but and there's also, I think, a perception that automation just means removing jobs, right? And we don't need the frontline workforce anymore. Can you talk about kind of the forces behind automation, and also how the humans are still involved, right, as we move to more automated processes, and what those roles shift to maybe over time?
Absolutely. And I've done a lot of research into this from the very beginning. One of the things I think that has hindered the adoption of artificial intelligence and automation is a lack of transparency. We don't understand the algorithms behind how these bots and automated processes are making their decisions. Now, one of the other perceptions that I find is that, even when we're selling an automated technology, there's a perception that, you know, there's an you can just implement this out of the box and it will
Yeah.
just work for what you're deploying it to do. That's not the case either. So, two common misconceptions that folks don't understand what's going on with the algorithm behind the scenes, and that they are not involved in the training of the model. Artificial intelligence is an infusion of what is in the minds of the folks that are doing the process, replicating that so that it can augment and expand the capacity with which you perform that task. So when you think about it in that way, the the human is still in complete control of that. The human is still in complete control of the development of the algorithm, the development of the model that is performing the task, that is, completing it and producing the result. I think that is something that we really need to be a little more bold in how we are promoting automated technologies. That the knowledge worker, and I love what you just said there. The frontline worker is a knowledge worker. If you think about everything that they need to do, the training and the decision making, the in the moment decision making that happens there, they are the ultimate knowledge worker. Because do they have a laptop and a computer or anything? Oftentimes they don't. They need to rely on what's here and their decision making and their training to take action in the moment.
So that also brings me,
Replicating that.
yeah, and that brings me to kind of another question, um, which is, you have all this knowledge, right? And in many cases, you've got frontline workers who've been on the job for years and years, right? Who have accumulated knowledge. And then there's that collective institutional knowledge from the entirety of the workforce. But in many segments, energy and utilities, I think, is a perfect example of this. We are now going through a demographic shift, right? We've got an aging workforce. In many cases, some of those companies, correct me if I'm wrong, are struggling, right, to find that next generation of worker who's going to come in. How does that, I guess, how do we think about the problem first? Because I'm not going to go to technology first, as you said, the problem of that institutional knowledge, right? How do we make that shift, right? And how does technology come into play to solve that problem?
Absolutely. And let's talk about it in terms of an opportunity.
Yeah.
So we do have an aging workforce, if you will, of line workers, substation engineers, et cetera, that are coming toward the end of their career. Those frontline workers have the ultimate knowledge here.
Yeah.
You have the next generation of folks coming up that are, they grew up with technology. They expect to have an element of technology available to them when they do their jobs. And, you know, frankly, probably are not excited about climbing a pole in the middle of a hurricane to do that work. Not that maybe their counterparts and their mentors who are going to be training them to do so were thrilled to do so at the time, but they didn't have options. So what we have is a convergence of an opportunity with a portion of the demographic of the workforce that is getting ready to move on or not, with an enormous amount of knowledge that they can pour into a set of processes and technologies and automation that not only makes it easier for the folks that they're training to do that work. It's the ultimate knowledge transfer. You
Mhm.
are doing it in a sustainable way instead of, bringing somebody out to the substation and showing them, and somebody's taking notes, and that person internalizes that information and then probably, puts it in his pocket and then goes and gets another job, and the process has to be repeats. Automation and automated processes are the ultimate way to be capturing that important knowledge that was used to do that work in a way that can not only support the new worker that's coming along to do that work, but then also provides a sustainable record of what that process is and why, to help to, keep um, keep the processes alive and sustainable as, natural attrition happens and new folks come into the role, regardless of the cause, whether it's somebody retiring, whether it's somebody moving on to a new job. You are not only creating automated processes that make the entire value chain sustainable, but you're also capturing the key information that allows not only the frontline worker, but automated processes, robots, drones, et cetera, to execute those tasks as well, where the humans either can't or are doing higher level tasks.
Are you starting to see that shift today among your clients in doing some of this automation or changing or thinking about that knowledge transfer? Is that happening, or is that still a little bit off?
I would say you've seen it shift from a nice to have. We've done business value studies within IBM that demonstrate in the last year there has been a change where maybe 15 to 20% of companies across industries indicated that AI and automation initiatives were on their list to, 60 to 70%. So we've seen it shift from a nice to have to a requirement, not only from a survivability standpoint, because we survived these last 18 months, but it was hard, and there's no promise that it won't happen again. So I do think it was an important wake up call for companies to understand that automation is not really a nice to have. It insulates you from the sorts of impactful business things like COVID that happen, so that you can maintain your operations in a more sustainable way if you are investing in these technologies.
So, you've talked a lot about automation and AI. Um, l- but in a lot of ways, they're still humans. In many ways, they're still out on an island, right? And I know we're trying to give them the tools to help make decisions. Are you seeing anything around collaboration technologies, messaging technologies, things where we can connect people to support them in the field as well?
So I do think that there has been a an increase in investment in collaboration technology, making it more reliable. I think the most prevalent is actually, the most prevalent being what we're using here today, the proliferation of video conferencing
Mhm.
and messaging technologies. I think this was something that was, again, a nice to have prior to the pandemic. I think we've all become experts, if you will, in where our mute button is and how we share information and how we send information along. So technologies like Zoom and WebEx and Teams, how we integrate that into the development of service models, right? with the sharing of information with messaging technology. There's a recognition that the distributed nature of our workforce is here to stay. That, the stand-up meeting in the data center where you're going to share information and then go away likely needs to be more formalized, more electronic, and have a trail, so that regardless of where your team is working, you have the ability to stay connected and together, with the important information that you're doing. And I think, again, that was something that was under development for a while, Gene. If you think about how we've started to adapt delivery teams around a service reliability engineering model, an SRE model, we have been working with distributed teams across the board for a while. So I think while this technology was probably blossoming and a little more mainstream in certain areas of the organization, now it's starting, I think, to move out more into the business areas where you're seeing different departments, different types of workers working in a similar fashion, needing to adopt those processes and share information.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I think that, very often these technologies can leave the frontline or the deskless worker behind a bit. I mean, you talked about Zoom and Teams and all, the technologies that we're using right now. But for the deskless worker in the environments in which they work and where they work, those things might just not be practical, right? They might not have connectivity, they may not have the bandwidth availability, and I feel like a lot of these technologies are designed certainly without them in mind, and we might try to be fitting a square peg into a round hole, if you will, when it comes to that segment of the workforce.
Well, let's think about, we'll start with how we embraced it, and then let's expand out. So, what was the big, topic of, the early pandemic when we all started migrating to Zoom, right? Oh, look, you refinished your kitchen, right? The background,
Yeah.
the background. You and I talked about it. Where are your dogs? Oh, mine are off in the other room. Controlling the environment, controlling noise, controlling interruption. We needed to adapt very quickly to essentially inviting people into our home for meetings, which we never would have done before, right? Calls were sufficient. But now, to maintain that relationship and trust, we need to look each other in the eye. We need to, be able to interact on that human level, be on camera. That required an adaptation for us. So now take that out into, again, I'll use my substation example. Um, what sort of background noise, connectivity are folks out on the front lines going to need to manage if they're going to do something similar? These outposts by design were not really outfitted for connectivity out of need, or really for security reasons. It's best that they be self-contained. How is somebody now armed with automated processes going to manage that connectivity and the environmental considerations around doing their job in an automated or technology infused way? They're going to have to go through that process of, how do I make it work for me? Again, back to, we don't want to do technology to people. This might look like a great cost savings opportunity for us to, automate that process, but you have to do technology with people, not to people. And it means going out to visit that substation, kind of survey the scene with that engineer, or it means going into that hospital setting and understanding what the technology, what the connectivity requirements are, making sure from a privacy standpoint, if you're needing to do some sort of, video augmented sort of meeting, that you can do so in a private and secure way. Um,
Yeah.
we need to make sure that we're walking the halls with these people and understanding their day in the life before we start figuring out where technology makes sense.
Yeah, and I love that phrase that you use, not doing technology to people. And it's a great segue because I did want to get back to that. You had mentioned that earlier. And I think there's, again, often maybe a misperception that the frontline workers are reluctant to adapt new technology. And perhaps it's not really reluctance to adopt new technology. It's just that the technology really isn't designed in a way that helps them or really meets their needs. I would just love to get your perspective on what do you feel, having worked with, energy and utility companies, manufacturing, what is the perception among frontline workers toward technology? Do you think they're really reluctant, or do you think it's something else there? Do you think they're willing to embrace it? Would just love to hear kind of some stories or anecdotes that you might have there.
I would say there are a couple of different forces working in our favor. Um, First of all, technology is becoming more prevalent in our personal lives. So, with that expectation, and if you think about the pace, we've talked a lot about the pace of technology in the past. We went from having it be new and cool to have a computer on our desk to be new and cool to having a computer in our pocket within 15 years, right? From a technology evolution standpoint, that's that's light speed compared to how we had progressed prior to the introduction of the personal computer. Things that, but the personal computer and the internet expanded things exponentially. So whereas your work life and how you did your work wasn't necessarily technology infused at the time, the other thing that has accelerated at an amazing pace is the way technology has been interwoven into our personal lives.
Mhm.
So what I'm finding is that on the home front, folks have a computer in their hand and they're able to do just about anything with that small handheld computer. So now they go to work and they expect that same look and feel, that same user interface, and that same immediate, that instant gratification of getting work done with technology in the workplace. I think the prevalence of it in our personal lives and how it has improved our ability to get many things done in our personal lives has worked its way into the workplace, where now the expectation of being able to have that same instant gratification is now there in the workplace. So, taking out of it any demographics, obviously we do have, our next wave of workers that are, as I said, they've grown up with technology. It's expected that everything is at your fingertips and automated. But regardless of demographic, there is an expectation that how we live our lives outside the office, well, why couldn't I do that with the different things that I do on a day-to-day basis at work? Why can't I do that? So it's sort of an awareness and a awakening of why not, right? That's where the real innovation comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you talk about the use of technology in our personal lives. I think one of the things we have to be aware of is, listen, in our personal lives, we choose the technology that we use, right? We choose the laptop we use and the phones that we buy and the applications we use, which is not the case when you get into the workforce. And you talked about the expectation perhaps of the next generation coming in, and perhaps your expectations might be a little too high. Because let's face it, I mean, the applications that and even some of the devices and the technology that exist today for the frontline probably is going to be wildly different than what they are used to. So it's interesting. Maybe some of the older generation of workers, right? They have lower expectations, I think, of the technology because they've seen it and they've used it, and maybe they've used the same thing for 10 years.
Yep.
And I think that is going to be a challenge for companies as the new worker comes in, because they're going to say, well, yeah, I want technology, but what is this you've just given to me? How do you see companies kind of adjusting to that?
They I think companies are going to have to start to adopt more of a why not approach. When I just said to you, why can't I do that?
Mhm.
Let's unpack that. It has to make good business sense. There has to be a very good understanding of the overarching business objectives and the business architecture and the value chains that to support the business. But if you start there with an innovative why not sort of approach, I think what many companies are finding is that there are cost savings to to being more innovative and in infusing technology into the way that they work. Not only are they, cutting costs from a traditional infrastructure standpoint, but they are cutting the costs of managing turnover and attrition. We've talked a lot about technology today as, how does it help organizations meet their business objectives? But at the end of the day, it's really a combination of people, process, and technology. You need to consider the intangibles of making that technology that your employees and, the talent that you're trying to attract into your organization. You need to really take seriously their expectations on how they are going to do their job to make sure that you are training and retaining good talent to meet those business objectives. It's quite circular, but I think those intangibles are something that we really need to give um, considerable weight, almost equal weight, to the cost, benefit, and savings of the technology that we're
Yeah.
adopting.
And I think that's a great point because we definitely see in many of these the industry segments that have large frontline workforces, they're having difficulty with the retention. They're having difficulty finding new employees, and I think you're absolutely right that technology can play a role in solving that problem, as you mentioned. I'd like to kind of just take this in a slightly different direction, Jen. As you know, this show is about talking about the frontline workforce and how we can help empower them with technology. But the other aspect of it is obviously our audience are either frontline innovators themselves or aspiring to be frontline innovators, and that's one of the reasons we bring people like you on the show, because they love to hear from them. I think one of the things they like to hear is, how did you get to where you are, right? How did where did you start from, and how did you ultimately wind up focusing on this area of technology, or kind of being in a more innovative mindset? I would just love to kind of get a perspective on your background and what you think kind of the paths to success were.
Well, I guess I'll take us back a little bit. I like many folks graduating with liberal arts degrees in the early 2000s. I was qualified to answer phones. So, and I think I find that a lot of my colleagues tumbled into IT a little bit. So, I started out, doing technical support, doing some customer service and pre-sales, sales for some hardware companies. But, in the spirit of innovation, Gene, I've literally created every job role that I have had. Um, since about the mid 2000s, because again, taking advantage of that pace of technology. What I went to school to do and study, I decided I didn't want to do, and technology was starting to emerge and become more prevalent in the business arena, and I jumped on that wave. Um, I I consider myself a lifelong learner. I know, some would consider that trait, but I just love learning new things. I love solving new problems. And if there's an opportunity that I see out there to solve a problem and I don't have all the skills that I need to solve it, I'm going to go find it. And that's given me the opportunity to, identify and build new roles to solve new problems to help weave technology into to organizations. So, with that, I think, taking that innovative spirit, there are, something like 60 to 80% of the jobs that folks will hold as they come out of college in the next 5 years haven't been created yet. There is enormous opportunity for us to look at what the needs, again, the secret sauce. I think I've shared with you, how I live my life, my formula by which I look to, innovatively weave technology into the workforce. It starts with understanding the overarching business objectives, and the business processes, and knowing that that is going to change. It's going to continue to change at a considerable pace as we come out of the pandemic. We're at the beginning of a recovery where there's going to be a lot of investment in infrastructure and manufacturing, in architecture. There's going to be enormous opportunity to leverage AI, to leverage data, to leverage new technologies, as we start to do so in a more sustainable way, right? That's going to create a new set of jobs that for those of us that enjoy learning, that have an innovative and entrepreneurial spirit, that go, seeking out problems that we can help to solve with what we know, or picking up new tools along the way, I think there is enormous opportunity to grab onto that. Again, continue to ride the wave. Always be looking for how you add value to, the situation that's right in front of you. Be always open to learning what it takes to be, a subject matter expert or a thought leader in that space, so that you can be of value, and then rinse and repeat. What's
Yeah.
going to be, what's going to be the next challenge. There's never going to be a shortage of challenges. There's never going to be a shortage of opportunities. And I think, for anybody, whether you're a deskless worker, whether you're a frontline worker, or whether you're a knowledge worker, we all need to become very, very comfortable with change, because, it's getting comfy. If you're too comfy, you're probably not learning, and you're likely to get left behind. And that condition isn't, nobody's going to be safe from the effects of that. So I do think, being comfortable with change and being ready to learn are going to be the keys to success and the secret sauce going forward.
Yeah, I loved how you started out your journey talking about answering phones. I did the same thing. That's how I started my career, and I think it gives us a little glimpse into your perspective of talking to the customer, talking to users, right? I think it's an invaluable lesson you learn early on in your career. It certainly sounds that you have weaved that through everything that you do, that lesson through everything you do. I think that's it. It comes across in the way you speak about technology, that it's not about technology, that it's about the user.
Yeah.
Speaking of technology and the fact that you spent your career in technology as I have, even though that probably wasn't the plan from the beginning, I've got a final question for you, which is, and this may be a tough one, but
Ugh,
it's a two-part question, which is, what
okay.
do you love about technology or working in technology? And what do you hate about working in technology?
Oh, oh, how much more time do we have, Gene?
We
I'll
can go
start
as
with
long as you want. This is a meaty one, I guess.
I'll start with what I love about technology. I am a fixer. I love fixing things. And I remember, how well, first of all, I'm an enterprise architect, but in my heart of hearts, I am still an Oracle DBA. I loved being a database administrator. And part of what I loved about that was making things work, getting installing the system, having that green check mark. There's something really satisfying about that green check mark and the associative ding that tells you everything installed successfully. Or that zing that you get when you write a program, write a stored procedure or something, you get it to compile and it returns the result that you wanted it to return, right? There is something very powerful about understanding and yielding technology to do your bidding. I don't know. Maybe that's, my inner control freak is probably coming out and telling you all about what I love about technology. But I love the fact that we can, you know, embrace what technology has to offer and make it do things for us. I love that. If I could get it to do my dishes, I would. My children don't want to. So I do. I love the satisfaction of building something that does what I told it to do. It's very satisfying. On the other side of that, though, Gene, I think, we talk about the prevalence of technology. Technology has given us that expectation of instant gratification, of having things done for us, that I think is not necessarily a good thing, right? There's not we have very little patience as an organization, as a society now, for waiting things to happen. We have, I think, less creativity and imagination in the way that we've used technology for entertainment purposes. I watch it in my kids while we've tried to curtail their, the time that they spend with screens and games and technology. They don't necessarily have the same appreciation for the world outside the computer. getting out and playing with
It's
friends
almost
and
an
roaming the neighborhood.
over reliance on technology to a degree.
It is an over reliance, and it's not that we don't have control over it as parents to make sure that we're controlling their time, but it's certainly more of a fight than our parents had. It's a lot more work to make sure that they are balancing their lives and their interests and the time that they spend between the games and the social media and the healthy things about getting outside and spending time in nature and exercising and being with friends without electronic devices.
Well, especially in a wonderful place like New Hampshire, go play in the mountains, in the lakes, in the woods. There's plenty to do there.
Absolutely. And plenty of places where you can hide where your phone won't work. That's
Yes.
where you'll find me
Yes.
when I'm done with it all. Yeah.
Well, Jen, this has been a wonderful conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time with us today and sharing your thoughts and ideas and stories. It's been great. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the time, Jean. I appreciate it.
Thanks. And for those listening, I hope you found this conversation as enlightening as I have. If so, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. A reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption platform for deskless and frontline workers. You can visit the website at skillful.com. That's skillful, SKYLLFUL.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story, and we'll see you on our next episode. Thank you.